Are you bored of your typical hi-fi speaker that might have good technical performance but sounds sterile and lifeless? Well, these Triangle Genese Quartets might be just the ticket. Hi, my name is Taryn and welcome to my review of the Triangle Genese Quartet speakers. I'd like to get a little housekeeping out of the way. First, I'd like to thank Triangle for sending these speakers for review. I was looking at a pair of speakers around the $2.5K price point. I reviewed a bunch of speakers around that price point, but not a horn speaker, so that was my particular interest with these. And these are a slightly unusual case in the sense that these speakers have been around for quite a while. They were discontinued by Triangle some time ago when they launched their signature range, but they're relaunching them back in the US and hopefully here in the UK as well. I'd also like to thank Adorama. Adorama is a retailer based in New York in America, and they reached out to me a number of months ago. They are primarily associated with photography equipment, but they have branched out into other fields such as home cinema and audio as well. And they said to me, Taryn, listen, if you happen to review any products that we stock, we're happy to provide you an affiliated link. Put that in your description notes, and it's a way of supporting the channel. So if you're interested in this speaker and you use the affiliated link in the description, it does help the channel out a little bit. They felt that a British audiophile was quite a good fit because they do quite a lot of educational videos, and there is sometimes slightly a technical aspect to some of my reviews. So thank you to Adorama and thank you to Triangle. The Triangle Genese Quartets are a tall, slim, elegant speaker standing some 1230mm high with the plinths in place. They have curved side panels which help reduce internal standing waves, and the pod on top that houses the titanium horn-loaded tweeter is half debaffled. And what that basically means is the top half doesn't have a cabinet around it. There's a sculptured plinth at the bottom that's very distinctive by the way it looks. It's got this steel spike at the front, and I think they look sensational with the grills on. A little bit less so with the grills off, but obviously if you're critically listening, you want to listen with the grills off. The cabinet is an MDF construction. They're here in the gloss white, but they're also available in the gloss black, and they were, when they were launched originally, available in a mahogany stained cherry finish, which hopefully they may well be bringing back as well. Internally, the tweeter and the woofer have their own section, and the two woofers also have their own symmetrically sized enclosures. The extra bracing inside obviously helps to improve cabinet rigidity. What's really a key feature is this twin vented port at the front. The top half of that port services the top woofer, and the bottom half of that port services the bottom woofer. If you have a look at the top left-hand corner, you'll see a spectral decay plot for a bottom vented cabinet. The right-hand side shows a center twin vented cabinet, as is the case in the Genese Quartets. The red arrows show, according to Triangle, the lack of distortion that you get by having this kind of arrangement. Now the graph at the bottom right illustrates this, and they've got a pink trace which shows the mid twin vented arrangement, the blue one which is the bottom woofer acting in a bottom vented cabinet, and the red line shows the top woofer acting in a bottom vented cabinet. And the theory is that basically you can get lower distortion by making sure that you get symmetrical base loading from each driver by having this twin vented arrangement with their own enclosures. In a normal bottom vented cabinet, the loading, because of the distance from the vent to the top and the bottom woofer, is different for the bottom woofer and different for the top woofer. The tweeter is Triangle's TZ2500 titanium dome tweeter. It's horn loaded, and that helps to boost efficiency and also means you can cross the tweeter over at a lower frequency. That cone-shaped phase plug, that improves directivity and the off-axis performance. The whole assembly is housed in this conical shaped pod. It's half debaffled, which means that you've got a cabinet surrounding the bottom half of the pod, but no cabinet surrounding the top half of the pod. and that helps to reduce edge diffraction issues. It's desymmetrization. Try and say that when you've had a couple of beers. I'll say it again. It's desymmetrization is basically an attempt to reduce diffraction issues. The mid-range is 160 millimeters. What's that in old money? 5.5 inches. Polypropylene cone, and that's covered in latex. That's to help with damping and improve linearity. The pleated suspension surround, that's basically there to reduce the emitting surface. It's a feature that's carried over from some of Triangle's higher end speakers. They produce some very high end speakers, and again, that's supposed to lower distortion. The woofers are also 160 millimeters wide, and there's 2 of them. And again, they're a result of technology that's filtered down from Triangle's higher end speakers, specifically the Maglan series. They're a fiberglass paper cone sandwich, and according to Triangle, this is a technology that has been shown to effectively reduce resonances in the higher bass, lower mid region. The cables inside are OCC copper. For those of you who are interested in cables and believe it makes a difference, OCC stands for Ono Continuous Cast. They're effectively a mono crystal construction. There's a lot fewer crystal boundaries and impurities than your typical oxygen-free copper, but they're also a lot more expensive, and it's unusual to find them in speakers at this price point. The Triangle Genese Quartets are all about tonality, dynamics, and engagement. Now I'm going to break down what I mean by this. The tonality of this speaker is that it's big, it's full, it's rich, it's warm sounding. It doesn't matter what you throw at it, whether it's male vocals, female vocals, strings, keys, percussion, everything has body, weight, and texture. It's a really appealing characteristic of this speaker. What do I mean by engagement? Well, that's really the way in which it throws out sound. Most conventional box speakers throw out sound behind them. They have soundstage depth. This is a horn-loaded tweeter. It throws out sound forwards. So it puts you much closer to the performance, in the front row if you like. Now this may be a characteristic you enjoy or you don't enjoy. It's just a matter of taste, but it's the way it is with this horn-loaded tweeter. It's not as spacious and as airy as the ATCs I reviewed, or my Proax for that matter, and I put that down to the characteristic of a narrow dispersion speaker. This horn-loaded tweeter, what effectively it does is it acts like an acoustic amplifier, and it narrows the dispersion of the speaker at high frequencies. You don't get as much side reflections, and a characteristic of narrow dispersion speakers that I noted, is a case of the Buchart S400s that I reviewed earlier, is that they don't have the same kind of airy, spacious quality that is associated with wider dispersion speakers. So what about dynamics? Well, this is a relatively large speaker. It has 2 160mm woofers in there. As you'd expect, it has quite a lot of bass weight and quite a lot of bass extension. It goes down to around 35 Hertz, and I'd consider that pretty much full range as far as music is concerned, at least. It doesn't have the same bass speed as the best monitor speakers around this price point, the ATC SCM 19s, my Proac Response 1 SCs, and to some extent the Buchart S400s. All are quicker at producing bass frequencies, but I'm comparing a floor standard to monitor speakers here, so it's trading some of that speed for greater bass weight and greater bass extension. It's not all about bass. The mid-range unit in the Triangle Genese Quartets is 160mm. That's wider than you'd ordinarily expect to find, and that's the reason why I think the mid-range is quite uncompressed, quite full, and quite open sounding. And there's something really special about the horn-loaded tweeter, the way in which it produces high frequencies. It has life, it has energy, vigor and vitality to it that I don't associate with normal kind of dome tweeters. It's not bright, it's not aggressive. There's something really engaging and enjoyable about the way that tweeter behaves. Do you sense a butt coming? There's a butt coming. All that energy, life, vigor, tonality and richness, I think comes at the expense of a little bit of clarity and resolution. It's not as clean sounding as the best speakers I've heard around this price point. There's some slight timing issue, and that robs it of that last bit of resolution and definition. It's not particularly poor in that category, it's just not a strong feature of these particular speakers. There's some slight timing issue. It could be the horn-loaded tweeter, it could be the crossover, it could be the time alignment of the drivers, and it manifests itself, as I say, in the clarity and the resolution, but it also shows up in the imaging of these speakers. It's not as precise in the way it images. Now, to explain what imaging means, it's basically the ability to place instruments specifically in their location within the soundstage that's created. It's a little more woolly than I would ideally expect and like at this price point. That's not its strength. But the way in which it produces sound, the tonality of it, the dynamics, and the way in which you engage with the sound of this speaker is something that's highly appealing. This is a relatively large speaker and it needs a bit of space to help it breathe. I had to move mine a good meter away from the walls to stop it from booming. It's also not particularly well suited to small rooms. Small rooms have enough problems with bass resonances. You're just compounding problems by putting a big whacking speaker in there and getting it to boom all over the place. So if you've got enough space for it, I think you're going to be fine. Now, in terms of partnering equipment, this speaker is rated at 92 dBs efficiency. Triangle don't specify whether that's 8 ohms or 4 ohms. I suspect it's 4 ohms. The minimum impedance is 3.2 ohms, and that would be the correct rating. Now, what you have to consider is that a 92 dB rated speaker into 4 ohms is drawing as much current from your amplifier as an 89 dB speaker rated at 8 ohms. So it's only moderately efficient. I partnered it with my Hagel H160, that's a 150 watt amplifier with a decent power supply, and it can drive most speakers relatively well. It drove these no problem. It's a very neutral sounding amplifier and it showed off the tonal characteristics of this speaker very nicely. I then partnered it with my Exposure pre and mono blocks. That's a much fuller, richer, more detailed amplifier, certainly in the mid-range. I thought that might be too much of a good thing, but it wasn't. It was just rewarded with better sound, better textures, tonality and details, particularly in the mid-range. I also wanted to try it with a relatively inexpensive amplifier. I've got a NAD C338 here for review that retails for around £500. That drove these relatively well as well. I was kind of surprised, but that is a Class D amplifier. Class D amplifiers are particularly good at driving low impedance loads. I think a Class AB amplifier around the £500 price point might struggle. So if you're not spending an awful lot of money on amplifiers, Class D may well be the route to go. In terms of its on-axis and off-axis performance, this is a narrow dispersion speaker like the Buchar S400s. And what that basically means is you don't have as much side reflections, and it's more forgiving of the spaces you put them in from an acoustic standpoint. So whether it's basically an acoustically lively or dampened down space, it's not going to have as much impact as a wide dispersion speaker. That's just a characteristic of narrow dispersion speakers. So in summary, if you've got the space for it, I don't think it's going to be a problem. Also, it's going to be probably quite forgiving of the type of room that you put it in, and it does require some quality amplification and a decent amount of power, but if you're not going to spend an awful lot of money, you may well want to look down the Class D route. This is a speaker that puts enjoyment ahead of accuracy and some other audiophile pursuits. There's no doubt for the same money you can get speakers with a quicker delivery that produce finer details and image better. The Triangle Genese Quartets put the performer in your listening space in a very intimate way. You get to be up close and personal without them sounding edgy and bright. In fact, it does it with warmth and grace. There's no doubt that some people will enjoy this delivery and others will not, and that's why it gets a recommended from this channel. But if you like what I've described, this may well be your ticket to musical bliss. Hopefully you've enjoyed my review of the Triangle Genese Quartets. If you like this video, please hit the like button, please share it, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider subscribing. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.